So hello and welcome, happy Friday. Today is Friday, the 6th of August already, and this is The Way to Be Backyard Beekeeping, episode number 120 for questions and answers based on questions that you submitted, viewers, over the past week. If you're brand new, welcome. Thank you for being here. You're going to find lots of cool information down in the video description below this video, and you can find out other links where you can get more information, find a fellowship, do all kinds of cool stuff, and see every question that we're going to discuss today in order. How hot is it outside right now? I bet you're wondering that. It's 81 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius. And don't forget that you can also listen to this as a podcast on Podbean. And that is The Way to Be. And this is The Way to Be. So thank you for being here. I hope you get something beneficial out of it. Today should be a short one. At least I hope so. Got a lot to do. A lot of stuff going on in the bee yard right now. Thank you to those of you who chimed in yesterday and sent nice comments on the visitor we had here, Eli, who wanted to learn about bees. And all he talked about was getting in on a YouTube video and having his face be seen by his classmates in New Mexico, the Albuquerque area. And so we did that yesterday. If you haven't seen that video, look for the link down in the video description below. Let's jump right into today's question, starting with Tony Killingsworth. Hi, Fred. I recovered a hive inside a water meter last week. Brought them and their comb home to put them in a 10 frame deep box. And checkerboarding their comb with wax frames, added a jar feeder of sugar water, which sugar syrup should be 1:1 for those of you who are curious right now. 1 part sugar, 1 part water by weight. And they started building comb on 2 of the black wax frames, but now, 8 days later, they're all gone. Not one bee left inside. That was very quick. Is there a reason they would leave? Okay, so we're talking about putting in a new swarm that you collect, regardless of where they come from, and you're going to put them in a 10 frame deep hive or an 8 frame deep, and everything was done right here. Of course, I don't know exactly where the hive is located, and but we're going to assume good location for the bees to not be bothered by things. And a couple of things come to mind right away when you collect a swarm. Number one, did you get the queen? You have to get the queen, and you know when the queen is in there because they'll be well settled in whatever cavity you've gotten to put them in, and you'll see them spreading their pheromone, the QMP, queen mandibular pheromone, which would be coming from the Nasonov gland, named after a famous anatomist, Nasonov. And that's where they would be helping to attract all the other foragers that are around and get them in the hive and let them all know that the queen is there. So let's assume all that was done, because sometimes we get in a rush and we collect that swarm. We're so excited. We load them in a box. We put them in our car. We haul them home. Because it says here, brought them and their comb home. So this may be well away from wherever this swarm was. So they may not be able to find, based on pheromone, where the queen is and where the rest of the cluster is. And also you might end up leaving the queen behind. You could overlook her. So that's one scenario. Do you have the queen? So we need to make sure. The other thing is we want to get them to stay. So what should you do? Well, you provide frames for them. Draw on comb as much as possible and resources that they can use, because there are things that will anchor your newly collected swarm of bees in the hive that you've chosen to put them in. So the hive sounds like it's a good size, 10 frame deep, single, inner cover, feeder on top. And then the 1:1, which should make them feel that they have resources so they don't have to go out foraging and get all worried about everything. But there is something else you can do. You can put a little temporary queen excluder on the front of that hive. And I've showed them in the past. I don't have one handy right here, but it's a little wooden frame with the stainless steel barred queen excluder. You can put that right in front, because then if the queen is in there, she'll remain. How long do you want to keep the queen inside that hive to keep her from taking off and going somewhere else? Long enough for her to start laying eggs. So that would have to be a mated queen, because sometimes swarms happen as an after swarm, and that may be with an unmated virgin queen. So we don't know what size the swarm was, if there's a pile of them. We don't know for sure if the queen was mated properly, or if she still may have needed to take her mating flights. So she needed to go possibly to another drone congregation area, get mated, and come back. Let's assume she's mated. then if you lock her in there, what are we waiting for? We're waiting for her to lay eggs. And once you see eggs, how quick after you've hived a swarm should you be opening it up and looking inside to see if things are going well? I recommend that you wait 10 days. And that's because we don't want to disturb them. We don't want their new environment to be unpleasant for them. You don't want to invade them. And so we want to make sure they don't move on because they're still potentially in swarm mode. They're still potentially sending out scouts to find a suitable cavity for them to occupy. So if you've put them in a cavity that you think is suitable and everything is great, and they leave it anyway, the good news is chances are they found a better spot. So you can at least wish them well. Or you can hold them until they've laid eggs. Now, if you don't see any eggs, when you do that inspection after that week, and there's no eggs in there, then you might as well just open the front anyway and let them all go. Because that queen either was not mated, or she wasn't with them at all. So there's a couple of scenarios there. And the other thing is, of course, they're building comb and everything, which tells me that they felt like they were mated, that there should be a queen there, or that there should be some level of queen pheromone present to get them to invest in the infrastructure there. So the absence of the queen, you wouldn't see them building a bunch of comb because they were free to go then, and they'd go off searching for the queen. Or return if they're not too far, because we've moved them. If they're not too far from the place where you collected them, they can still find their way, in the absence of the queen, to the hive, the colony cavity, where they originally emitted from, where the swarm was generated. So lots of variables, but I do know one thing for sure. If you get the queen and she lays eggs, your chances of keeping that swarm are very high. If she doesn't lay, then everything is still up in the air and you could lose them. So those are all my guesses about why that happens. Sometimes I've had colonies swarm out and leave after I recently hived them, only to come back within a day and reoccupy the hive. So it's worthwhile to find the queen and mark her, if you can, with a paint pen so that you know, is this a different swarm? Is it the same one that came back? And so on. Don't restrict that queen for too long, because if she's an unmated queen, she needs to fly out and do her mating flights once they're setting up as well. So that's another game that you're playing. Question number 2 is from Aaron, Wadsworth, Ohio. I usually wear gloves when I inspect my hive. I don't like getting stung, and I don't know a good way to get the propolis off my hands and out of my fingernails. What's your cleaning regimen? Also, is there a way to clean my leather gloves? Thanks. Well, first of all, for cleaning your hands, this is anybody that works with their hands and gets stuff on them that is gooey and like maybe there's motor oil if you're a mechanic of some kind. But if you're a beekeeper and you get your hands in that hot propolis, for example, much worse than wax, because the propolis really does stick to everything, including your hands. So I have an old bar of pumice soap that I just scrub everything off with, but there's something else that you can get. It's called Gojo Natural Orange Pumice Hand Cleaner. Get the little squeeze bottle of it and try it out. See how that stuff works. So it's a lotion form and should be able to get everything off your hands. There's no reason that your hands can't look nice and clean even when you work with bees. So the other thing is about the leather. So we talk about what is your cleaning regimen. Also, is there a way to clean my leather gloves? Well, I have to be honest about something here. Here's the leather gloves, by the way. Don't those look awesome? They're in terrible shape. These gloves are like from 2006. And I don't wear leather gloves anymore, so I bring these around just for show. But how do you keep them flexible? And this goes all the way back to when I used to take care of horses, when I used to ride a Morgan horse up in Chester, Vermont. This is saddle soap. This old rusty can of it. But saddle soap is the go-to thing for cleaning your leather gloves. Also, if you're some kind of weightlifter and you have a weightlifting belt that's cowhide, works on that too. So it's for cleaning and getting everything nicely cleaned up, but then you're also going to need some kind of conditioner after that. So this company, I hope I don't pronounce this wrong, but it is Fiebings, Fiebings saddle soap. So if you go to that company, I'm sure they have follow-on conditioners recommended. So this is primarily for cleaning it out, because when you overclean, if you do this a lot, even the cleaners don't necessarily treat and condition the leather so it stays supple, because these things are already super hard to manipulate your fingers in and do any kind of fine work. Why do I even have those? Well, for questions like this, for one. The other thing is, it's a great way to find out how defensive a hive is by putting rawhide in front of it, because for some reason that animal smell, that rawhide smell, really gets them going. So if you got a borderline defensive colony, they're going to launch on that. The other thing is, back in 2007 and so on, when I was inspecting my hives with these gloves, because I just didn't know any better, you always have bee stingers in them, all over them. And then you're wondering, why are your bees so defensive? Well, because they're stinging, they're releasing an alarm pheromone, the stings are also becoming the attractant for other bees to sting, and nothing does that better than leather gloves. But Fred, I want to wear gloves that are going to protect my hands, and I don't want to be stung. So the next thing that does not cause your bees to react in a defensive way would be goatskin. Goatskin gloves don't seem to bother the bees at all. Plus, they're a little bit thinner, gotta be honest, but they maintain dexterity. So they are a very good step down from full-on rawhide. When would you wear these? When you're going to war with the bees. You're gonna get in there, there's gonna be some CQB with some Africanized bees. Then you're gonna max up on your suit, multiple layers of clothes, leather gloves like that. You already know they're going to attack you, so we're not worried about insulting them. They already hate you. They're already going to do stuff that's insane. So that's when you would put on those leather gloves if you really want to get in there and do some heavy work, moving colonies, and you already know things are going to get out of hand. But that wouldn't be for a beginner beekeeper. That's just one way, one reason that you might be using heavy leather gloves. Let's move on to question number 3. Oh, look, we jump right into a defensive hive question. So can you discuss in your Q&A how to deal with a defensive hive? Yes, we can. I am dealing with one now. I looked back in my notes, and it started on 7/14, so July 14th, and before dearth, and the hive was split early spring. So this is a 2021 queen. There's a huge population. That's interesting to note too, because sometimes your most defensive and aggressive colonies are the largest too. So it's weird how they go hand in hand. And during the last brood box check, I didn't see the queen, but there was capped brood and larvae. I didn't see eggs, but I don't have good eyesight for that task. Is it time to requeen? Thanks for all you do. So let's just put these basics together. We have a huge population, and they're defensive. So a couple of things that we can do under our control. Now, levels of defensive behavior. That's something we really have to think about, because what one person perceives as defensive might be getting stung by a single guard bee just because they walked out in the apiary. They're so defensive, stung me right on the eyebrow, for example. And then you get upset and you want to deal with them. So the other thing is, when you're just looking at the colony, can you get right down at the landing board and just observe them? I mean, we know we should observe beehives from the sides and not be directly in the flight path of the foragers. But this was before the dearth, so there were resources coming in. So this is a time when your bees should be the most passive. So we know that this is a new 2021 queen. Are the guard bees watching you and launching out at you just because you're in proximity to the hive? And how many come out? 15, 20, 30, 40? So if you've got a swarm of defensive guard bees around your head and face, every time you go just to look at the hive, you're not even getting into it yet, that would be defensive. It'd be extremely defensive if you're still 50 to 100 feet away and all they do is see your movement in the proximity of the hive and they fly out in a group and start engaging you and start trying to sting you, right? So that would be more defensive. Then as you get closer, they of course ramp that up, and they're going to deposit their stingers on you, and they're going to mark you as a target with their alarm pheromone. So they also bite. Yeah, honeybees bite you with their mandibles, and they mark things that way too, as well as marking you with their stinger when they let you be stung. So when they sting you, they're also coating the stinger on its way out. So there are many ways that they identify something that this colony needs to perceive as a threat and therefore needs to attack and sting it. So they're all a bunch of levels. 1 or 2, maybe not the end of the world. You get mobbed, like a nurse came and talked to me about in the hospital one day a couple of years ago. said that the bees came out so heavy that they covered the veil and he could not see through his veil. That's how many bees were on there. That's extreme defensive behavior and requires an extreme and immediate response. So, I don't have a lot of information about how defensive it was. But one of the things that we can do is we can split it. When you split it, you can split their resources. You can split the eggs. You can split the larvae. You can split everything equally into 2 different boxes. And you can make sure they have no queen. So if you've got one without eggs and everything that is not laying or producing yet, we can take eggs from the colony that has the eggs and put that in there. We can also locate the queen. And because they're defensive and acting hostile to people, it's your job now to track them down and find that queen and get her out of there to help reduce the genetics. Now, this is not the colony that's attacking like the nurse described to me that covered the veil. That's a whole different thing. It's time to kill them. But if we've got moderate, intermediate, hot hive, it's called often, where they just aren't super friendly and you always pick up a handful of little defensive bees, even when you're not getting into the hive. So by splitting it, we're reducing the numbers, we're reducing their resources, and we're dividing them, and we're going to cause them to produce new queens. So we're going to get a brood break. So that's going to also result in a natural varroa mite control measure. And we're going to get new genetics because they're going to produce new queen cells. That queen's going to have to fly out, mate with drones. And we're in a semi-dearth right now. It's described here. But we're at least 15 days or more away from queens hatching. That's if they even started working those eggs right now. And then we're another 9 to 12 to 14 days after that before the queen gets out and gets mated. So we're actually going to be mating at a time in this part of the country where there's going to be a lot of resources because goldenrod is starting to bloom. Asters are going to come out of that. We're going to be in our late season nectar flow, so it's actually a prime time nutritionally for them to be kicking off some good bees there. So we want to reduce the size of the hive, change the genetics, get the queen out, let them do some of their own pest management with that brood break that's going to happen when the queens are gone and they have to make the new ones. And they're going to come out of it just in time to build enough resources, we hope, assuming the weather cooperates, that we should now have a single deep and a medium box for each of those to get them through winter. And worst case scenario, you have to feed them during winter. So that's what I would recommend. But there again, I don't know the levels that we're talking about, the extreme levels, because what can happen with a hot hive, a defensive hive, what's defensive to one person is totally workable to another, and if it's not a threat to people, pets, or animals in the area, then you might still find them workable just by reducing the numbers and resources. See what happens. And I hope we get a follow-up report from Eileen, who is having that issue. Hunt the queen. Take her away. Let them make a new queen, and hopefully the new queens will mate with drones that are of a better temperament and still have other traits that are favorable in your area. Question number 4, moving on. Michael, Kamsack, Saskatchewan. And this is funny too, because I found out that my grandmother, who lived in Vermont, was from Saskatchewan and was still a citizen of Saskatchewan, and she just had a green card to be here in the United States. Pretty cool. Anyway, I was talking to a local beekeeper, and when talking about honey extracting, he told me if I scraped the honey and wax off of the foundation, the bees would not draw new comb on that foundation. Is that correct? So when we're talking about foundation that we're scraping off, I know this is a drone frame and it's green in this, but the principle is the same. This kind of foundation that we'd be scraping, we assume, would be plastic foundation. So I don't ever get plastic foundation for my bees that is not already primed with wax. The only exception to that rule is right back up here, and that's in the flow frames for a flow hive. Those I do not have any wax coating on, they're just plastic. So I'm going to talk about what kind of matters or what changes things. If you had these without any wax on them at all, you still may have bees that will still work off of these frames based on bee space and their orientation to each other, and the bees just naturally using space available and attaching to that frame, usually at the top, and they start making a little arc down, and then they start drawing it out. What I will say is there's no question that the more real beeswax you have on that foundation, the quicker the bees are going to work it. That doesn't mean they won't work it at all if this were just unwaxed foundation. Why would anybody bother buying unwaxed foundation? Well, some people don't want the beeswax that comes from the man on their hives. And by the man, I mean industry. And that's because there's a lot of articles out there that talk to you about the residue that's in beeswax, and it is reinforced. It is ubiquitous. It is in beeswax from all over the place. The residues from the chemicals that are used in agriculture are well seated in the material of the beeswax that's being sold and used on these foundations. Should that be an alarm bell for you? Well, I'm just going to leave that up to you, because we don't know that those residues are enough to impact the bees. I would say that right offhand, on a practical level, the wax that they're going to attach and amend onto that, the new cells that they're going to draw out, they're not going to make much issue out of the impact that would come from the wax residue that's already on those. It is everywhere. Look at wax testing. This is why Dr. Leo Sherishkin gets his wax foundation from Spain, for example, in an area where they're only using organic farming practices. Here in the United States, finding exclusively organic farming practices and exclusively organic beeswax is going to be very hard, because the tests show that there's residue there. Maybe not on a level that would impact your bees, though, but I'm just telling you that, food for thought, give you lots of things to think about. But I'll give you an example of what a harvested frame looks like. So this is acorn heavy waxed frame that you use in your beehive. And of course, this is not the way it comes from acorn. This is a harvested frame. So why are the edges all like that? Well, some people like to use an uncapping fork when you're going to put it in your extractor and you're going to spin the honey out. So the more wax that you leave on the foundation, the more wax that you leave behind after extraction, then you let the bees clean it up, and then they're going to work that up and draw out the remainder of the cells. So the more that's on the frame when you give it back to the bees, the better for the bees, because they're going to use less resources, less honey, to produce new wax with their wax glands. So the more wax you leave, rather, I know this isn't a head-to-head saying that your beekeeping acquaintance is wrong or right. I'm just saying the more wax that's on the frame when it goes back in the hive, the less resources the bees are going to have to use to manufacture new wax, to draw out new cells, fill them, cap them, and put you back in business for honey collection. So that's my take on that argument right there. Question number 5. This comes from William from Manchester, Maryland. Question: getting 3 nukes in spring and putting them in 10 frame boxes along with the 5 frames that come with the nukes. Can I use Bettercomb to fill out the other 5 frames as needed in the boxes? Please remember to forget about expense! Exclamation point. Would it be a boost for the colony or hinder them? As always, I will take your advice. Anyway, so here's the thing with Bettercomb. Oh look, I just happen to have some. This follows on with what we just talked about. The more wax that exists already on the frame, the less work the bees have to do. This is Bettercomb. What is Bettercomb? If you're brand new to that, it's a synthetic beeswax that's biochemically almost exactly the same as wax made by bees. However, it is not. It is made in a lab in Hungary and sold in the United States under the name Bettercomb. You may have heard of it under other names, but that's what the stuff is. And I tested this 2 years ago going into winter, and one of the ways that I tested the Bettercomb to see if it would help out the bees was to put them in late season swarms, and I'm talking way late season, like you would write them off. Most people don't want swarms even now, but some people are collecting them since we're at the beginning leading edge of a heavy nectar flow here in northwest Pennsylvania, northeast Ohio. Then we're about to give them an opportunity to really build up, assuming that the queen is healthy and everything else goes to plan. And also you don't have a bunch of varroa destructor mites also making all your bees sick or spreading disease. So What happened was I did that to 5 late season swarms. All 5 of them came through winter, our heavy winters here, in a single deep box with feeders on top. And what was offered to them in the feed was just dry sugar in rapid round feeders. That was it. So I am convinced that the better comb gave them the advantage, because sometimes in the late season, bees need warmth to work beeswax. It's not just a matter of the colony, how many are there, whether or not their wax glands are activated, whether or not they can actually work with the wax. They need the temperature parameters to be warm enough to work new wax. So that's the other thing. How many warm days do we have left? So better comb satisfies that, because it puts them well on their way, and they can also start storing immediately the nectar that they're bringing in, the pollen that they're bringing in. And we have nucleus colonies here, 3 of them. So they're coming with 5 frames. They're going to be in a 10-frame box. So we're going to augment that by filling out those outer frames, keeping the nucleus frames together. Those 5 will be in the middle, and the others will be the outlying frames. And so you'll have 2 on each side, 3 on one side. So the one that's got the 3 empties, that would be the side away from sunrise. So that would be on the west side if your hive is oriented north and south. So if your landing board faces south, put the 3 empties towards sunrise and the 2 empties towards sunset, because they'll work it towards the warmth of early morning first, and that which is farther away from the sun last. But if you flip them the other way, it really won't matter. Center your 5 frames from the nucleus colonies and see how that goes. Do it both ways and see which one fills up those empty cells, empty frames first. But better comb, definitely. And you get that from Better Bee. There are other people apparently that are selling it now also. I got mine from Better Bee, and the last time I checked, they did not have pre-wired Better Comb frames ready to go, but they said it would be in a couple of weeks, so maybe they do now. If they do, please write that down in the comments below. Absolutely. Better Comb. It works. It's worth it. Even though other people say your bees will never touch it, that has not been my personal experience with my bees. They touch it, they use it, they lay eggs in it, they store resources in it, they expand. Question number 6. This is from Balint and from Hungary. Interesting, we just talked about hexa cells from Hungary, which is Better Comb here in the United States. I did not have bees, but they are frequent visitors in my backyard, and I noticed that they disappear well before sunset while the air is still warm and the visibility is good. Why do bees stop foraging earlier than it seems to be necessary? Well, when the bees are out foraging, first of all, we don't know how far they've traveled. They may go miles to forage. On average, 2 to 3 miles in every direction. That does not mean that they skip over resources that are closer to them. I'm just saying they have the ability to fly farther if they need to get the resources that the colony demands. Pollen, nectar. So the other thing is, why do they quit so early? Well, a lot of factors come into play there. First of all, when are they flying the most? So there are early bird foraging bees that get out there right at 9, 10 in the morning, and they're covering the ground pretty good. But you see that foraging behavior really picks up in the early afternoon. So 1, they have the time to get there. 2, the colony warmed up. So if we have a cool overnight, they're kind of clustering, and when it gets in the low 60s and high 50s, so they also have to warm up in the hive. They have to start to spread out a little bit, and they are warming broods still this time of year. So a lot of them will stay in the hive. The other thing is, as things start to cool down later in the evening, even before sunset, the bees may start to head back and congregate and unload their resources in the hive. And the other thing is, at least where I live, we have a heavy dew that comes down in the early evening. So as the sun starts to set, even though there's plenty of light as described here and the sky might be clear and the bees can navigate, they know the direction of the sun and things like that, they are also reacting to an increase in moisture on the plants because they don't want to get dampened pollen. So that's the other thing. We start to get a dew settling on the grass where I live. I mean, things could be totally different where this is going on. So this is just speculation about why the bees might be heading out early and stopping their foraging activities. Dampening, time to get back to the hive, unload their resources and everything. And so the prime times for bees out foraging would be anywhere from 11 a.m. to about 6:30, 7 o'clock in the afternoon, early evening here, because sunset is still a couple hours beyond that. But that's when I noticed the drop off here, and those are my speculations. Dampness of the pollen, cooling of the air, settling of the sun, going down, and then of course the bees need the time to get back, and there is work to be done once they get back to the hive. They have to pass off their resources unless it's pollen. Pollen that's on their legs, they fly in there, they scratch it off of their legs right into the cells, but the foragers, again, that are heading back later in the day are not sending out new foragers to that location. So there you go. Those are my guesses. And then P.S. It would be great if you could add time codes to the video description. Sometimes I would like to skip a question I'm not interested in, but it's hard to find the start of the next one. So I'm going to talk about that right now because I want to give a big shout out, and I hope you will too, to Adam Holmes. Adam Holmes is the one that comes in usually within an hour or so of a new video being posted. He'll get the top pinned comment in the comment section. And he's done this for almost every video I've made that deals with questions and answers in order. He puts the time codes and he recycles the question on there, and it always becomes the pinned question and a pinned comment in the comment section below a video. He also is the one whose time codes I use in my podcast at Podbean, so that you go to the comment section there and they have links to the video. So when you hear something in the podcast and it doesn't sound very well described because the speaker just didn't do that good of a job, then you can of course click on the number, the time code, and it takes you to the YouTube video so you can actually see what's going on. So it's already being done, it's just not being done in the video description. It's being done as a pinned comment down in the comment section. And huge thank you to Adam Holmes, who does that faithfully every single Friday. So here you are with question number 7 from James Tant, Clarksville, Tennessee. I was wondering if you have a suggestion to get bees to move honey from a super down into the double brood chamber I want to overwinter in. Well, this is part of packing down, where we're going down to a brood chamber that you want to overwinter in. You want to make sure that you get your bees out of that super and give them enough time to store additional resources, because this was a question I think that came up and I may not have answered last week actually, which is how much time do we need to leave at the end of the year once we've taken honey off for the bees to store their resources? Well, I do that kind of in reverse here in Pennsylvania. I start with the deep brood boxes. We have them fill a medium super of honey before we go on with any supers or honey supers that we would be taking resources off of. That way we know they're set. So even if we have a terrible summer, terrible weather, get into fall, they still have a terrible situation where all they're doing is keeping their resources static without increasing, then we know that they've got what they need to get them through winter. So as we get into this time of year, I think that you should use a bee escape to get the bees out of that honey super that you want to pull off, and then get them down into that bottom box. And that bee escape should be on for about 24 hours on average. Then you're going to remove it. Hopefully you're doing this when the honey is capped, ready to be removed. And do this in the middle of a heavy nectar flow, the last one of the season, so that they will still have several weeks of warm weather, so they can work on their infrastructure, because you're going to reconfigure the hive and they need to seal it up. And the other thing is, so they can build those resources, because their hive numbers, their occupation of that hive should be at a maximum now. And that means they're going to have a lot more foragers that can go out, bring in a lot more resources and start storing everything up for winter. And then they will be condensed down, and the queen will start to create those winter bees as the days get short and the resources start to thin out. Resources thinning out in the environment, nectar and pollen, are triggers for your queen to start reducing her egg laying, and also for those worker bees and for the queen to produce those fat-bodied winter bees that are going to sustain them for several months, instead of those that are now working to their expiration in just a matter of weeks this time of year. So that's my suggestion. Reduce it, get the bees out of the super that you want to take off. But other than that is also, if you have an upper entrance or upper venting like that, close off the upper entrance, stop the upper venting, and then the bees will naturally move lower into your lower boxes with a single entrance, and hopefully they'll be storing honey at the top, and the population of the bees will move down, furthering and facilitating your ability to remove them from that top box and then buckle it down so that they will have just the bottom boxes that you plan to use for winter, so they can arrange their stores down there. This is question number 8 by Jackie R. I made a bunch of slatted racks and the hive visors for all my hives, and they're doing so much better now. Making those slatted racks was a lot of fun for me because it really got me tinkering with my woodworking skills, and I loved it. So fun. I just hope all my bees do well and make it through winter. Any tips to make sure new colonies make it through winter, especially when the year has not had a lot of nectar and pollen provided? What can I do to help these guys through the months leading up to winter to make sure they're ready? I know we don't have much time. The drought certainly isn't helping things. Now, I don't know what part of the world. Let's see. Think in the Northeast. So anyway, it is just the same as what I just described. So the time of year to start closing things down and making sure they have enough resources where I live, and we get extended winters. Last winter was a terrible winter with very few cleansing flight days that were warm enough for the bees to get out. So they needed, people say, 50 to 100 pounds of honey. And this is contingent upon what kind of bees are in the hive, how many bees are in the hive. Just the more bees, the more resources they need to get through winter. But we also need enough bees so that they can have a meaningful cluster and have that predictable die-off of bees through the winter, so that they still have a residual cluster of bees that can do multiple tasks inside the hive, keeping brood warm, forage when foraging is available, defend the hive, cleaning the hive, attending to the queen, and all of these other activities that go on all at the same time require more than 5,000 bees minimum. So, going into winter, we want to make sure that we've got enough resources. Sometimes people think, well, more must be better. So if I have a deep box and a medium super full of honey, why not keep several boxes of honey on and then go into winter, and then in the spring pull those off? Now, I agree, spring is a great time to be pulling off surplus honey that was not used through winter. And last winter, not only did the bees survive, but those that did survive used less honey than they ever have in the past, which was a big puzzle to me. So I had a bunch of leftover honey on the hives. But the tendency is to think that why not have 2 or 3 boxes full of honey going into winter, and that's a bad idea, and I'll tell you why. If you're in a cold climate, and that's because the colony, the number of bees inside, cannot keep up with all of the interior surfaces of the hive through winter, because they're going to be packed down in this tight cluster. And that always starts low, just above the brood. And that's where they start to migrate across the surface of the honey that they have stored. And they do that vertically. And that's where Dr. Leo Sherishkin came up with his 1 millimeter a day movement of the cluster up over the surface of the comb. So we know how many inches of honeycomb full of capped honey that they need to get them through winter, based on how many days your winter is going to be. So anyway, while they're doing that and they're down here, they are also respirating, and they're letting off moisture, and they're warming the brood in the middle. And so this causes condensation on the interior surfaces of the hive. Where do we want that condensation to happen? So as of last year, all of my hives went into winter with insulated covers. And this year, they're going to go into winter with insulated inner covers and insulated outer covers, now that they have that new insulated inner cover by Bee Smart Designs. So I'm going to put that right now. I only have that on half of my hives, but I'm going to have it on all of them going into winter, except for the horizontal hives. So anyway, that cluster is here. Let's hypothetical. We're going into winter, the cluster's here, and now we've left all these boxes on so they can have all these great resources. But what we really now have is a whole bunch of surface area up above the cluster. That comb is going to get cold at night because the bees don't heat the entire inner surface, even though there is secondary heat going on inside that hive. It's going to condense on those surfaces, and it's going to create moisture on comb that is not occupied by the bees. It's not cleaned by the bees. It's not maintained by the bees, because if we get a cold winter, they're just going to stay clustered, and it's going to move very slow, and they're going to warm and use honey as they occupy the surface of it. So if you have a whole bunch of stuff above them, that is going to sour. because condensation, it's going to get condensed. There's going to be water on it. It's going to dry out as the day warms up, and we're going to have all these cycles. And there's going to be a lot of moisture dripping down in your bees. So this is the balancing act. We only want what we think their maximum use is going to be. So 1 medium super or 2 medium supers above that cluster in that deep box should be it. And I'm talking from personal experience, personal failures here. Deep box, super colony, gobs of bees in there. And then we've got all these boxes, and that's going to be great. And in the spring, that's going to be my colony that's going to do so well. And that's the colony that crashed because they generated all this moisture into the hive, and the hive was so big, they never occupied all the spaces. They never kept everything clean. And this is where we get a lot more condensation where we don't want it. I want that condensation on the outside walls, interior surface, so the bees can take advantage of that moisture and bring it into that cluster and feed the bees. But I don't want a whole bunch of surface area above the bees because honey holds heat. Honey also holds the cold when it's exposed to cold, so it's a cold battery now. And then when the air around it starts to warm up the following day, condensation on the surface of the honey, and it can ruin the honey. You can get mold, you can get everything. So we want to balance it for your area, what you think they're going to need, and not a whole lot more than that, because these oversized colonies have not done well for me. That's my advice on that. So help these guys through the months leading up to winter to make sure they're ready. You always have to check your hives going into winter, seeing if they're getting ready, seeing if they have the resources that they need. If they don't, if they really have understored resources, so this is the opposite problem of too much honey left on going into winter. If they're understored, you're going to have to start feeding them. Again, appropriate for the number of bees that are in the colony, because what are they going to do if it's a large number of bees and they don't have the resources that they need and winter's about to come along? This is the worst robbing time of the year for honeybees. If you're supposed to have a heavy nectar flow and there isn't one for any number of reasons, lack of rain, lack of resources, monoculture, whatever's going on, where are they going to get the resources that they need when they're desperate? Other bee colonies. So they're going to be attacking colonies. And this is another one where the super colonies prevail. They're the ones that need it the least. They have all this honey reserve. And what do? They've got so many foragers, they send them out and they raid smaller colonies. So, lots of stuff to think about there. But if they're not putting on weight and the hive is too light, then you're going to have to feed them. And in the fall, the feed is different. We mentioned 1-to-1 sugar syrup earlier on in this discussion today. But in the fall, if we want them to store it, that's where you go to your 2-to-1 sugar to water by weight. And that's also when the water has to be really heated up in order to liquefy all of that sugar. And that's where we get a lot of discussions too about dry sugar feeding and things like that. But this sugar syrup they will store like honey. And keep in mind, that's not stuff that you want to be taking off later and extracting and selling or using as honey. So you need to make sure that you're only feeding when it's absolutely necessary. And I hope that's helpful. So anyway, that was my last question for today. And it's in the 80s, and I have stuff to do out in my apiary, and I hope that you have stuff to do in your apiary and that your bees are doing great. So I want to thank you for being with me today. If you have questions, please write them down in the comment section below. If you want to join a fellowship and you want to talk about bees and you have questions or ideas you want to bounce off of your peer group, then go to Facebook group, The Way to Bee. And somebody will let you in, and you can find out. Very friendly bunch of people, day and night, all over the world. Somebody is always there paying attention, happy to give their opinions, and it's a sharing area. Talk about bees. Talk about what's going on. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? Does it work? This and that. Lots of conversations. Fantastic. Thanks for being here. I hope that you have a fantastic weekend. We have good stuff coming up next week, including the horizontal hive inspection. Don't miss it. Thanks for watching.